The Darkness Between Stars, a story of ancient threats, hidden survivors, and the price of salvation, featuring Ambassador Sorrel Vane and Counselor Seth. The Newcomers. Ambassador Sorrel Vane had lived for 380 years, and in that time he had greeted perhaps 60 new species at the Galactic Council Station. He had stood at the observation window for each arrival, watching the primitive vessels wobble through their docking procedures with the patient condescension of a parent watching a toddler learn to walk. The ritual was always the same: wonder on their faces, awkwardness in their movements, the careful, faintly embarrassed gratitude of beings who understood they were very small guests in a very large house. He expected no different from the humans. He was at the window when their ships arrived. That was already wrong. New species dropped out of hyperspace at the designated coordinates and then crawled toward the station on conventional drives, giving the council time to scan them thoroughly. The human ships did not do this. They appeared already close, shimmering into existence like a thought becoming solid, and Vane's first impression was that space itself had decided to take on mass. 5 vessels, not large by any standard he recognized, but their hulls absorbed light in a way that made them less like ships and more like absences, holes in the universe cut into vaguely ship-shaped outlines. They did not gleam, they did not reflect, they consumed. "Ambassador Vane," said a quiet voice beside him. He turned and found Counselor Seth, his science officer, holding a scanner with an expression that Vane had never seen on her face before. Seth was 200 years old, meticulous, unflappable, the kind of scientist who responded to extraordinary data with calm note-taking. She was not calm now. "The sensors cannot read them," she said. "Not instrument failure. The instruments are functioning correctly. They simply cannot find a coherent surface to analyze. The ships appear to exist partially outside measurable space." Vane looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked back at the window. "That is impossible," he said. "Yes," Seth agreed quietly. "And yet." The other ambassadors were having similar conversations across the greeting hall. The great powers of the galaxy, 12 civilizations that between them had mapped the majority of known space, were standing in clusters looking at their scanners with the particular confusion of beings who had been entirely confident in their instruments until this moment. Admiral Dreth of the Kree Dominion, who had never shown uncertainty about anything in the 40 years Vane had known him, was staring at his device with his jaw set in a way that suggested he was deciding whether to be angry or afraid. He settled on angry. It was safer. "Primitive species," Dreth said, not quietly enough. 300 years of space travel. They should be docking at the lower ports and asking us politely what everything is. He snapped his scanner shut. "Whatever is wrong with these readings, it is instrument error. I will not be unsettled by a newcomer species." Vane said nothing. He was watching the human ships. They had stopped now, hanging in space before the station with the patience of something that was not in any hurry, and he had the sudden strange feeling that they were watching back. What the ambassador noticed. The human delegation walked through the docking doors 12 minutes later. There were 5 of them, dressed in dark clothing without decoration or insignia. They moved quietly. They looked at everything. Vane had met enough diplomats to recognize a professional when he saw one, and the man at the front of the group was unmistakably that. He was perhaps 60 years old by human reckoning, with a lean, weathered face and eyes that were taking a careful inventory of everyone in the room. His name, according to the advanced documentation, was Ambassador Marcus Hale. Hale looked at the assembled ambassadors with an expression that Vane struggled to categorize. It was not nervousness. It was not the suppressed awe that newcomer species usually displayed when confronted with the hall's deliberately overwhelming architecture. If anything, it looked like recognition, as if Hale had been in rooms like these before, had understood rooms like these before, and had formed opinions about them that he was being diplomatic enough not to express. Vane stepped forward and spoke the formal words of welcome. He had delivered them many times. He made them warm and genuine, because that was his job and he was good at it. Hale listened, nodded, and responded with a brief, precise acknowledgement that suggested he had read the council's ceremonial protocols thoroughly and considered them reasonable, but not especially important. "Ambassador Vane," Hale said, "humanity is glad to be here. We have been looking forward to this for some time." Something in the way he said it made Vane want to ask exactly how long, and exactly why the looking forward had that particular quality to it, like a man glad to finally set down something very heavy. He did not ask. Not yet. The ceremonies proceeded. They were long, as they always were, built from ritual phrases and formal gestures that had been old when most of the council species were young. Vane watched Hale through them. The human ambassador participated correctly, neither stumbling nor hurrying, performing the required responses with the accuracy of someone who had memorized them carefully. He was also, Vane noticed, methodically memorizing the layout of the chamber.
His eyes moved in small, specific patterns. He was cataloging exits, positions, the faces of the other ambassadors, the locations of the security personnel. He was not afraid. He was prepared. After the ceremonies, Vane found a moment to approach Hale alone. "Your ships," Vane said without preamble. Hale looked at him with calm, measuring eyes. "I apologize for any inconvenience. That is not an explanation." "No," Hale agreed pleasantly. "It is not." The silence stretched. Vane had conducted negotiations with dozens of species and was not easily outlasted, but there was something in Hale's willingness to simply stand there in the silence, comfortable and unhurried, that suggested he could do this indefinitely. "You are not what we expected," Vane said finally. Hale's expression shifted slightly. Not quite a smile. Something more complicated. "Ambassador Vane," he said, "I think you may be one of the few people in this room who has noticed that. I appreciate it." He paused. "When the council is ready to have a real conversation, I am available. There are things you need to know." The truth about the ships. The weapons demonstration was Admiral Dreth's idea, and Vane thought it was a bad one from the moment Dreth proposed it. The Kree tradition of challenging newcomers to prove their military worth has a long history, and most of that history consisted of newcomer species producing something modest and being gently informed that modest was fine for their stage of development. Dreth intended it as humiliation. I could see it in the set of his shoulders. He had been unsettled by the scanners, and he wanted to restore the natural order of things. Hale accepted the challenge without hesitation, which was the first surprise. He would send one ship, that was the second, against a Kree battlecruiser, 2 kilometers of armor and weapons that had never been defeated in combat. The humans would send a single vessel approximately 400 meters long. Dreth laughed. Several other ambassadors laughed. Vane did not laugh. He had been thinking about what Hale had said. There are things you need to know. A man preparing to be humiliated did not say things like that.
Counselor Seth stood beside Vane on the observation deck when the Kree battlecruiser appeared in the Theta 7 system, massive and impassive, its shields glowing blue in the dark. The human ship materialized nearby. Even at this distance, even on the display screen, it had that same quality of wrongness that Vane had noticed at the station. The light around it bent slightly. The stars behind it seemed to shift. "Seth," Vane said quietly, "your best theory. What are those ships actually doing?" She had been working on the question for 3 days. "Partial phase displacement," she said. "The ships exist in 2 states simultaneously, normal space and what we theorize as an adjacent dimensional substrate. It would explain the sensor failures and the visual distortion." She paused. "The energy required should be impossible. The mathematics to achieve it would take centuries to solve." "Unless," Vane said, "you had a reason to solve them quickly." The battlecruiser's weapons fired. The beam struck the human ship dead center with enough force to vaporize a mountain range. The human ship moved through it, not evaded it, moved through it, as though the weapon had struck something that was not entirely there. Then the human ship responded, and Vane watched, utterly still, as the space around the battlecruiser began to distort. It was not a weapon in any sense he recognized. There was no beam, no projectile, no visible energy discharge. The fabric of space simply changed, and the battlecruiser, 2 kilometers of the most advanced Kree engineering, crumpled inward as if squeezed by a force that existed everywhere around it simultaneously. It took 40 seconds. The battlecruiser was the size of a ground vehicle, then smaller, then a sphere of compressed metal the size of a transport pod, slowly cooling, floating in the silence of the Theta 7 system. Dreth said nothing. The observation deck said nothing. Across the fleet of 50 vessels that had gathered to witness the demonstration, Vane imagined the same silence spreading like a wave. He looked at Seth. Her scanner was in her hand. "Gravity manipulation," she said, her voice very steady. "Not local gravity, something deeper. Access to the dark matter substrate that underlies all normal space physics." She looked at the cooling sphere. "If they can do that to a battlecruiser, they can do it to a planet." "Yes," Vane said. "I believe that is the point." His communication screen activated. Hale's face appeared, and the expression Vane saw there was not triumph. It was the same complicated thing he had noticed in the greeting hall, almost grief. "Ambassador Vane," Hale said, "I think the council is ready to have that conversation now." The Umbrel. The council chamber had never been so full or so quiet. Hale stood at the center podium, without notes, without a display running, just a man and his words, and what he said restructured everything Vane thought he knew about the past 2 centuries of galactic history. 217 years ago, humanity had made first contact, not the kind anyone had hoped for. Something had found them, something that existed in the dark matter substrate, the invisible architecture that made up 95% of the universe's mass. They had no ships, no form in any conventional sense, no language that could be decoded. What they had was hunger, or something that functioned like it, and humanity had attracted their attention by existing.
The images on the display showed Earth, then showed what happened to Earth. Vane had seen wars. He had seen the aftermath of planetary bombardments, the records of species that had destroyed each other. He had never seen anything like this. The creatures Hale called the Umbrel did not destroy infrastructure. They destroyed matter. They passed through shields and walls and bunkers as if those things were irrelevant, which to beings that existed in a different dimensional state they were, and they simply unmade what they touched. 3 billion people in the first day, half the planet's population in the first week. We called them the Umbrel, Hale said, his voice even and precise, the voice of someone who had told this story many times in training rooms and briefings, and never let it stop being true. We did not win the war against them. We survived it. There is a significant difference. The survival had cost everything. Earth's population fell from 12 billion to 2 billion. The outer colonies were gone. The fleet was reduced to a handful of vessels. But the Umbrel, in attacking, had left traces. Fragments of their technology, pieces of dark matter architecture that had fallen out of phase and become partially analyzable. Humanity had spent 50 years in near extinction studying those fragments, reverse engineering the physics of a dimension they could not see, building ships that could reach into the dark matter substrate, because the only way to fight creatures that existed there was to learn to exist there yourself. We rebuilt, Hale said. We expanded, and we came here, because the Umbrel withdrew when we became too costly to pursue, but they did not leave. They are in the dark matter that fills this galaxy. They are everywhere. They watch, and the things we have detected in the past 6 months suggest they are moving again. He put the map on the display then. The galaxy, familiar and vast, with its web of civilizations and trade routes, and the careful borders of 1,000 political arrangements, and in the dark spaces between the stars, subtle distortions that Vane's instruments had not been designed to detect. Patterns, movement. Vane studied the map and felt something cold settle in his chest. They were not on the edges. They were throughout, distributed in the dark matter that pervaded Batter's system, every planet, every inhabited world. They had always been there. Humanity had simply been the first species to draw their attention. "What do you want from the Council?" Grand Chancellor Morteva asked. She was the oldest being in the chamber, 600 years old, and her voice carried a weight that the question deserved. "An alliance," Hale said. "Equal partnership, not the arrangement you offer newcomers. We want to stand beside you, and in return, we will share the technology. Everything we know about dark matter physics, about phase displacement, about fighting the Umbrel, everything, freely, without conditions, because the alternative is that they come for all of us, and none of us can stop them alone." He looked around the chamber. "Humanity fought them alone once. We survived. We would prefer not to repeat the experience." The threshold. Colony World Tasari 7 died on the 42nd day after the alliance was formalized, and after that no one in the Council needed convincing that the threat was real. 12 million people, gone in 6 hours. The communication relay falling silent between one transmission and the next. The patrol fleet that investigated finding empty cities and untouched infrastructure, and no trace of the inhabitants. The Umbrel did not leave wreckage. They did not leave anything at all.
Vane spent the next 6 months watching the combined fleet hold a line that ordinary weapons could not hold. Human dark matter ships fighting in the spaces between spaces, while Council vessels evacuated civilians and maintained the boundaries of the battle. It was not a comfortable alliance. Dreth's arrogance had not survived the Theta 7 demonstration intact, but it had survived, and there were moments when the command structure strained under the weight of military traditions that had evolved separately for hundreds of thousands of years. Vane spent a significant portion of those months in a room with Hale and various admirals, translating between military cultures with the diplomatic skill he had spent 4 centuries developing. Hale was a useful ally in that room. He had no interest in credit or precedence. He had interest in the problem being solved. Seth brought Vane the analysis 6 months in the middle of the night, because she had not wanted to wait until morning. She had been tracking Umbrel movements, applying the detection methods the humans had shared, and she had found something, a source. Not a random distribution of attacks, but a pattern with a center, a point in the void at the galaxy's edge where the dark matter substrate was tearing, a wound between dimensions that the Umbrel were using as a door. As long as it existed, the attacks would continue. If it could be closed, the Umbrel currently in normal space would be cut off and vulnerable. The problem was that closing it required working from the inside, from the dark matter side of the tear, in a dimension that only human ships could reach. Hale listened to the plan without interrupting. Then he was quiet for a long moment. "How many ships would it require?" he asked. Seth gave him the estimate. Hale nodded slowly. He looked at the map for a while. "The conventional fleet would need to hold the Umbrel's attention," he said. "Draw them to the forward positions while we reach the threshold." "Yes," Seth said. "And if you succeed," Vane said, carefully, "you seal the door from the inside.
I want to understand the exit plan. Hale looked at him with those measuring eyes. We know the physics well enough to seal the threshold, he said. Getting back through before it closes is a different question. The silence in the room was very loud. Marcus, Vane said, using the human's given name for the first time. What are you telling me? I am telling you that humanity has done the math, Hale said quietly, and we think it works, and we are going to do it regardless, because the alternative is everything we have been protecting gets destroyed anyway. He paused. I would rather you knew. The combined fleet assembled at the galaxy's edge 3 days later, 3,000 vessels from over 100 species, the largest military force in recorded galaxy history, arranged around 47 dark human ships that flickered at the boundaries of visible reality. Vane stood at the observation window of his flagship and watched them. He had drafted the eulogy already, the night before, unable to sleep, working through it with the care he gave all his most important writing, because he thought it was the least he could do. Before the fleet moved, Hale's face appeared on the communication screen. He addressed the entire assembled force, and Vane listened to a man he had known for 6 months speak with the particular clarity of someone who has made their peace with the situation and arrived on the far side of fear. The Umbrel came through the threshold in numbers that defied counting, wave after dark wave of shadow creatures that conventional weapons passed through harmlessly. But the conventional fleet did not break. Dreth's warships formed walls and held them. Valoran cruisers pulled the damaged back and put fresh vessels forward. Tasari science ships projected experimental fields that slowed the advance by fractions of seconds that saved lives by dozens. And in the center of the chaos, the human ships moved toward the threshold, flickering between dimensions, unreachable and unstoppable, taking losses that Vane watched on the display with a focused grief that he did not allow to become paralysis. The Hermes, the Athena, the Apollo, names he had learned in the past months, crews he had met in briefing rooms, gone one by one as the Umbrel threw themselves at the human formation. The remaining human ships reached the threshold. They vanished. One moment present, the next simply not there, crossed into a dimension that no scanner could follow. The conventional fleet held the line. Minutes passed. The threshold flickered. Its edges began to contract. The flow of Umbrel forces slowed, stuttered, stopped. The creatures already in normal space began to weaken, cut off from whatever sustained them, and the Council fleet tore into them with a ferocity born of 6 months of helpless defense finally having something it could affect. Within an hour, it was over. The threshold sealed itself completely with a final contraction that Seth's instruments recorded as the most significant event in dark matter physics since the formation of the galaxy. The Umbrel were gone. The dark spaces between the stars were empty, and the human ships did not return. Vane delivered the eulogy in the council chamber, to every species who could send a representative. He said what he had written, and then he said things he had not written, because the written words were not quite sufficient. He said that humanity had come to the council as strangers, and left as the reason the council still existed. He said that the cost of what they had done was a debt that could not be calculated and should not be forgotten. He said that the technology the humans had shared would ensure the galaxy could defend itself, and that this was what Hale and his crews had wanted, and that the least the council could do was make sure it was worthy of the price. Seth, beside him, was not crying because Seth did not cry. Her expression simply had that particular quality of someone understanding something terrible and important simultaneously. The transmission arrived 11 days later, fragmentary and distorted, from outside measurable space. Vane watched Hale's face resolve from static on the screen with a feeling he had not experienced in decades. "We made it through," Hale said. His voice was tired but intact. "The threshold is destroyed. We found a stable region on the other side. We are working on the return path." He looked directly at the camera in a way that suggested he knew exactly who would be watching. "Tell the council we kept our word. Now hold up your end. Build the ships. Learn the physics. Make sure this never happens to anyone again." The screen flickered. "We will find our way back. Humans generally do." Static, then nothing. Vane stood in front of the blank screen for a long time. Outside the window, the stars were the same stars they had always been, cold and numerous and indifferent. But the darkness between them was different now. It was empty. It was safe. And somewhere inside it, in a dimension that no one else could reach, 47 ships and their crews were doing what Hale had said humanity generally did, finding their way home.